The warm glow of the evening sun filtered through the blinds of John's sleek downtown office. His phone buzzed incessantly with reminders and emails, each demanding his attention. It was another typical day in the life of John Whitman, a man whose success as a real estate agent was matched only by his growing restlessness. His marriage to Sarah, once a partnership filled with love and laughter, had grown stale over the years. It was comfortable but uninspiring, a stark contrast to the electric thrill he felt every time he met Michelle. Michelle was everything Sarah was not: daring, vivacious, and unapologetically bold. She was the spark John had been craving, or so he told himself. That evening, as he rushed to wrap up his paperwork and head home, Michelle's teasing voice echoed in his mind. "Don't forget to text me tonight, John. I'm not waiting forever," she had said earlier that day, her lips curling into a sly smile. She had a way of making even the most mundane words sound like an invitation to something illicit. Now, standing in his office, John fumbled with his phone. His fingers hesitated over the screen as he typed, "Can't stop thinking about you. Tonight was amazing. You make me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years. I wish I could see you again now. I'll find a way." Satisfied with the message, he hit send without a second thought. He glanced at the clock. It was late. He needed to get home before Sarah started asking questions. At home, Sarah was setting the dinner table in their pristine suburban kitchen. The soft hum of the dishwasher and the faint aroma of roasted chicken filled the air. She paused as her phone buzzed on the counter. Wiping her hands on a dish towel, she picked it up, expecting a message from one of her book club friends. Her heart stopped. The message wasn't from a friend. It was from John. "Can't stop thinking about you. Tonight was amazing. You make me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years. I wish I could see you again now. I'll find a way." The words pierced through her like a dagger. For a moment, the room spun. She set the phone down, gripping the counter to steady herself. Her mind raced. Was this some kind of mistake? An old message accidentally sent? No, this was recent, and it was meant for someone else. Sarah stared at the phone, her hands trembling. The initial wave of anger was overwhelming, but something stopped her from reacting. She had been married to John for 18 years. She knew his tells, his habits, and lately she had felt the distance between them widening, though she had tried to ignore it. Now, the evidence was glaring, undeniable. But what should she do? The sound of the garage door opening snapped her out of her thoughts. She shoved the phone into her pocket and forced herself to breathe. John was home. "Hey, honey," John called out as he walked into the kitchen, his voice cheerful but hurried. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic was awful." Sarah turned to face him, masking her turmoil with a practiced smile. "No worries, dinner's ready." John kissed her on the cheek, the gesture so automatic it felt almost hollow. He glanced at his phone on the counter, checking for a response. Sarah caught the movement but said nothing. As they sat down to eat, Sarah tried to act normal, but her mind was a whirlwind. She studied John as he talked about his day, noticing things she hadn't paid attention to before. The faint cologne that wasn't his usual scent, the way he avoided eye contact when he spoke about work. The signs had been there all along, and she had chosen not to see them. "So, how was your day?" John asked, his tone casual. Sarah took a sip of water, buying herself time. "It was fine. Just the usual: errands, laundry, the grocery store. Nothing exciting." John nodded, his attention already drifting back to his phone. The moment he glanced at it, Sarah felt a pang of bitterness rise in her chest, but she pushed it down. Now wasn't the time to confront him. "John," she said, her voice softer than she intended, "do you ever feel like we've fallen into a routine? Like we're just going through the motions?" Her question caught him off guard. He looked up, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," she said, forcing a small laugh. "Maybe I'm just feeling nostalgic. Remember how spontaneous we used to be? How we'd stay up late talking about everything and nothing?" John relaxed slightly, thinking she was reminiscing, not accusing. "Yeah, those were good times. But life's different now, you know? We've got responsibilities." "Of course," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "But sometimes I think we need to make time for each other again. Don't you?" John hesitated, unsure where this was going. "Yeah, you're probably right. Probably." The word stung, but Sarah kept her composure. If he was expecting her to lash out, she wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. Not yet. Later that night, as John showered, Sarah sat in bed with his phone in her hands. It was unlocked. He hadn't thought to change his passcode. She debated whether to dig deeper. She could scroll through his messages, find more evidence, confront him with undeniable proof. But something held her back. What good would it do to see the full extent of his betrayal? She already knew enough. Instead, she opened their shared photo album. It was filled with memories of their family, birthdays, vacations, candid moments. One photo caught her eye, a picture of them from 10 years ago, standing on a beach, laughing as the waves crashed around them. They looked happy, genuinely happy. She couldn't remember the last time they had laughed like that. The sound of the water shutting off snapped her back to the present. She put the phone back on his nightstand and lay down, closing her eyes as if nothing had happened. John climbed into bed moments later, his hair damp, his phone untouched. "Good night, Sarah," he murmured, leaning over to kiss her forehead. "Good night," she replied, her voice calm but her mind racing. As the room fell silent, Sarah made a decision. She wouldn't confront him, not yet. She wanted to see how far he would go, how much he was willing to risk. And in the meantime, she would do something unexpected. She would fight for their marriage in her own way. Whether it was out of love or pride, she wasn't sure. But one thing was certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Sarah's day began as it always did, with the soft hum of her alarm and the faint light of dawn creeping through the curtains. But today, something was different. She no longer felt the dull ache of routine weighing her down. Instead, there was a simmering resolve beneath the surface. The text message John had sent wasn't just a betrayal, it was a wake-up call. For the first time in years, Sarah felt like she had a choice. And she wasn't going to squander it. Morning conversations. John sat at the breakfast table, scrolling through his phone as usual, his coffee untouched. Sarah moved about the kitchen with purpose, a slight smile playing on her lips. She set a plate of scrambled eggs in front of him and sat down with her own cup of tea. "You're in a good mood this morning," John said, glancing at her briefly before returning to his screen. "Am I?" Sarah replied, her tone light. "Maybe I've decided to stop taking things for granted. Life's too short, don't you think?" John looked up, caught off guard by her comment. "Yeah, I guess so." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes meeting his. "John, do you ever feel like we've lost ourselves in all of this? The kids, the house, your work? Sometimes I wonder if we've forgotten how to be us." John's jaw tensed. "I mean, things change, Sarah. People change. But that doesn't mean—" He stopped mid-sentence, unsure of what he was trying to say. Sarah reached out and placed her hand over his. "I miss us, John. Don't you?" The sincerity in her voice was disarming. John nodded slowly, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He felt the weight of her words, but he also felt the tug of guilt gnawing at him. He squeezed her hand briefly before standing up. "I've got to get going. Big meeting today." As he walked out the door, Sarah watched him carefully, her smile never faltering. She wasn't sure if he'd heard her, but she was certain of one thing. He was thinking about it. This returns. Over the next few weeks, Sarah's transformation was subtle but undeniable. She started taking better care of herself, not for John, but for her own sense of pride. She joined a yoga class, something she'd been putting off for years. She went out with friends, laughing and sharing stories over wine. She even updated her wardrobe, trading her usual jeans and sweaters for dresses that made her feel confident and beautiful. John noticed. "Wow," he said one evening as Sarah walked into the living room wearing a sleek black dress. "You look amazing." Sarah smirked. "Thanks. I'm meeting Lisa and the girls for dinner." "Since when do you go out on weeknights?" he asked, genuinely surprised. "Since now," she replied, grabbing her coat. "Don't wait up." John watched her leave, an unfamiliar pang of jealousy twisting in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't the center of her world, and it unsettled him. The office whisper. At work, Michelle was growing impatient. Their relationship had been thrilling at first, secret meetings, stolen moments, but now it felt like John was pulling away. "Are we meeting tonight?" she asked, cornering him in his office. John hesitated. "I don't think I can. Sarah's been different lately. I need to figure out what's going on." Michelle scoffed, crossing her arms. "Different how? She suddenly remembers she's your wife?" Michelle, don't, John warned, his voice firm. This isn't about you. Oh, but it is, she shot back. You can't keep stringing me along while you play house with her. Make a decision, John. You can't have both. John stared at her, the weight of her ultimatum sinking in. For the first time, he began to question whether the affair had been worth it. Unexpected dinner plans. One Friday evening, Sarah surprised John with a candlelit dinner. The table was set with their best china, the soft glow of candles casting warm shadows across the room. She wore a red dress, her hair swept up in an elegant bun. What's all this? John asked, his brow furrowing. I thought we could have a date night, Sarah said, her voice warm but measured. It's been a while since we've just talked. John hesitated, guilt swirling in his gut. He felt like he was walking into a trap, but Sarah's calm demeanor disarmed him. He sat down, pouring himself a glass of wine. As they ate, Sarah steered the conversation toward lighter topics, funny memories, stories about the kids. She was charming, confident, and utterly composed. John couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between them. Sarah, he said finally, setting his fork down. Are you okay? I mean, you seem different lately. She tilted her head, considering his question. I'm more than okay, John. I've just been thinking about what I want out of life, what I want from us. And what's that? He asked, his voice cautious. I want to be happy, she said simply. And I want you to be happy too. Her words were like a punch to the gut. John stared at her, unsure of how to respond. Did she know? Was this her way of confronting him? Or was she genuinely trying to rekindle what they had lost? A storm brewing. That night, as they lay in bed, John's phone buzzed on the nightstand. Sarah turned her head slightly, watching as he picked it up. His expression shifted, first to guilt, then to tension. Work email, he muttered, setting the phone down. Sarah said nothing, turning back to her side of the bed. She didn't need to see the screen to know it wasn't work. John lay awake long after Sarah had fallen asleep, his thoughts racing. He felt like he was standing at a crossroads, with Sarah's quiet strength pulling him one way and Michelle's fiery passion pulling him another. He didn't know how much longer he could keep walking this tightrope. The quiet resolve. The next morning, Sarah watched John leave for work, her expression unreadable. She knew he was still lying to her, but she also sensed his guilt. The man she had married was still there, buried beneath the mistakes and the distance. As she sipped her coffee, Sarah made a promise to herself. She would fight for their marriage, but she would not lose herself in the process. If John was worth saving, he would have to meet her halfway. And if he wasn't, then she would walk away with her head held high, knowing she had done everything she could. The battle for their future had begun, but Sarah was no longer the passive participant she had once been. This time, she was in control. John leaned back in his leather office chair, staring blankly at the computer screen. His productivity had plummeted over the past few weeks, and it wasn't hard to see why. The affair with Michelle, once exhilarating and forbidden, now felt like a chain wrapped around his neck. Meanwhile, Sarah's transformation, her warmth, her new sense of independence haunted him. For the first time, he couldn't dismiss the gnawing guilt that had been building inside him. His phone buzzed on his desk, breaking his reverie. The screen lit up with Michelle's name. He hesitated before answering. Hey, he said, keeping his voice low. John, we need to talk, Michelle said sharply. Her tone was devoid of the playful flirtation that had once drawn him in. Is this about last night? He asked, already dreading the conversation. It's about us, she said, her voice hardening. I'm tired of being kept in the shadows. I need to know if you're serious about leaving her, or if I'm just wasting my time. John rubbed his temples, the pressure mounting. Michelle, it's complicated. No, it's not, she snapped. You either want to be with me or you don't, but I'm not going to sit around waiting for you to make up your mind. Her words hung in the air like a challenge. John closed his eyes, wrestling with the decision he knew he had to make. The breaking point. That evening, Michelle didn't wait for John to come to her. She showed up at his office just as he was packing up for the day. Her entrance was as dramatic as ever, her heels clicking against the tile floor like gunshots. We're not doing this over the phone, she said, shutting the door behind her. Michelle, this isn't the time, John muttered, glancing nervously at the glass windows lining his office. Then when? She demanded. You keep dodging this conversation, John. I need answers. He sighed, sinking into his chair. What do you want me to say? That I'm ready to leave my wife? I'm not. Not yet. Her eyes narrowed. Not yet? That's your excuse? Do you even love me, or was this just about the thrill? The question hit him like a punch to the gut. He had asked himself the same thing in recent days, and the answer wasn't as clear as he wanted it to be. I don't know, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Michelle's face hardened. You don't know? After everything we've been through, that's all you can say? John stood, his frustration bubbling over. I'm trying to figure this out, Michelle. My marriage, my family, these aren't things I can just walk away from. And what about me? She shot back. You think I don't deserve more than stolen moments and empty promises? Their argument escalated, voices rising and overlapping. Finally, Michelle grabbed her purse and stormed out, leaving John alone in his office with his thoughts. Sarah's intuition. At home, Sarah was beginning to piece things together. John had been more distracted than ever, his phone always close at hand, his mood swinging between guilt and defensiveness. But what stood out most was his growing unease whenever she showed him kindness. It was as if her newfound warmth only amplified his inner turmoil. That night, as they sat on the couch watching TV, Sarah decided to test the waters. John, she said softly, turning to him. Are you happy? He looked at her, startled by the question. What do you mean? Are you happy with us? With this life we've built together? She asked, her tone gentle but probing. John hesitated, searching for the right words. Of course I am. Why would you even ask that? Because sometimes it feels like you're somewhere else, she said, her eyes locking onto his. Like there's something you're not telling me. John's pulse quickened. He forced a laugh, trying to deflect. You're overthinking things, Sarah. Work's just been stressful lately. She nodded, her expression unreadable. Maybe. But if there's ever anything you need to talk about, you can tell me. You know that, right? Of course, he said quickly, his guilt nearly suffocating him. But Sarah wasn't convinced. She could feel the lies beneath his words, and they only strengthened her resolve to uncover the truth. The affair unravels. Meanwhile, Michelle was done waiting. The next day, she called John's office from the parking lot, demanding that he meet her outside. He reluctantly agreed, slipping out during his lunch break. Michelle, I told you. No, she interrupted, her eyes blazing. You don't get to brush me off anymore. I'm not some dirty little secret you can hide in the shadows. Either you leave her or I walk. John ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. You don't understand. Sarah's different lately. She's making me feel things I haven't felt in years. Michelle's expression shifted, a mix of disbelief and betrayal. Are you seriously telling me that after everything, you're falling back in love with her? I don't know what I'm telling you, John admitted, his voice breaking. All I know is that I can't keep doing this. It's not fair to you or to her. Michelle stared at him for a long moment before shaking her head. You're a coward, John. You don't deserve either of us. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving John to grapple with the wreckage of his choices. The shift. That evening, John came home to find Sarah in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner. The sight of her, so calm, so unassuming, hit him harder than he expected. Hey, he said, his voice softer than usual. She glanced up, smiling. Hey, how was work? Fine, he lied, leaning against the counter. Can I help with anything? Sarah raised an eyebrow. Help? Who are you? And what have you done with my husband? He chuckled, but the guilt in his chest felt heavier than ever. I mean it. I want to help. Okay, she said, handing him a knife. You can chop the onions. As they worked side by side, an unfamiliar silence settled between them. Not the tense, strained silence of recent weeks, but something softer. It was as if they were finding their way back to each other, one small step at a time. A sleepless night. That night, as Sarah lay in bed pretending to sleep, John sat in the living room with his phone in his hand. He scrolled through his messages, his finger hovering over Michelle's name. He thought about deleting the thread, erasing the evidence of their affair. But something stopped him. Instead, he typed a single message. I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry. He hit send and deleted her number from his phone. Upstairs, Sarah opened her eyes, sensing the shift in the air. She didn't know what John had decided, but she felt that the tides were turning. The question now was whether their marriage could survive the storm. The air was heavy with tension as John sat at the dining table, his hands gripping a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Across from him, Sarah moved about the kitchen with practiced ease, her every movement graceful but deliberate. She was humming softly under her breath, a tune John couldn't place. It wasn't the hum of a distracted woman. It was the hum of someone who was waiting for something. He couldn't shake the feeling that she knew. The receipt. Earlier that morning, Sarah had stumbled upon undeniable proof. While tidying up John's side of the bedroom, she found a crumpled hotel receipt tucked into his suit jacket pocket. It wasn't from any work trip she knew of. The date on the receipt was recent, too recent. She unfolded it, her heart pounding as she scanned the details. A single room booked under his name. Sarah stared at the receipt for what felt like an eternity. She placed it carefully in his drawer, but not before adding a handwritten note. We all make mistakes. What matters is how we fix them. The confrontation begins. That evening, Sarah set the dining table for two. She had prepared his favorite meal, steak, roasted vegetables, and a bottle of wine they had been saving for a special occasion. When John walked through the door, the smell of garlic and rosemary greeted him. "What's all this?" he asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. Sarah smiled, a soft and disarming expression. "I thought that we could have a nice dinner, just the two of us." John hesitated. Her calmness unnerved him, but he pushed the thought aside. He couldn't ruin this moment with paranoia. As they ate, Sarah kept the conversation light, weaving in fond memories of their early days together. She talked about their first road trip, the time they got lost and ended up at a small-town diner, and the way he had made her laugh until her sides ached. "Do you remember that?" she asked, her eyes locked on his. John smiled faintly. "Yeah, I remember. You were so charming back then," she continued, her tone warm but edged with something sharper. "You always made me feel like I was the only woman in the world." John's grip on his fork tightened. "Sarah, what's going on?" She leaned back in her chair, studying him carefully. "I'm just reminiscing. Can I do that?" "You can, but—" He trailed off, unable to shake the feeling that there was more to her words. The note. After dinner, Sarah poured them each a glass of wine. She handed one to John and took a seat across from him, the candlelight casting soft shadows across her face. "I found something today," she said, her voice steady. John froze. "What do you mean?" She reached into her pocket and pulled out the hotel receipt, sliding it across the table. His heart plummeted as he recognized it instantly. "Sarah, Don't," she interrupted, holding up a hand. "Just listen." Her calmness was more unnerving than if she had been yelling. John stared at her, his throat dry, as she continued. "We've been married for 18 years, John. 18 years of ups and downs, good times and bad. I thought I knew you. But now?" She took a deep breath, her voice faltering slightly. "Now, I don't know what to think." John's hands trembled as he reached for his wine glass. "Sarah, I can explain." "Can you?" she asked, her eyes piercing. "Because I've been watching you. The late nights, the phone calls, the distance, and now this." She gestured to the receipt. "You don't need to explain, John. I already know." John set the glass down and buried his face in his hands. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice muffled. "I'm so sorry, Sarah." Her composure cracked for a moment as tears welled in her eyes. "Why, John? Was I not enough? Was our life not enough?" "It wasn't about that," he said quickly, looking up. "It was never about you. I felt lost, like I wasn't the man I used to be. And Michelle, she made me feel—" He stopped, realizing how pathetic his words sounded. "She made you feel alive," Sarah finished for him, her voice bitter. He nodded, unable to meet her gaze. Sarah laughed, a hollow, humorless sound. "Do you know what's funny, John? That's exactly how I've been feeling for years. Stuck. Invisible. But I didn't run to someone else. I stayed. I fought for us." "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "And I don't deserve you. I know that now." A crossroads. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stood, her hands trembling as she collected their empty plates. John watched her, unsure if he should say something or let her process everything. Finally, she turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Do you want this marriage, John? Truly?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "I do. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this, Sarah. Just tell me how." She studied him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of insincerity. "Then you're going to have to prove it, because right now I don't trust you." "I will," he promised, standing and reaching for her hand. I'll do whatever it takes. Please, Sarah, don't give up on me. She didn't pull away, but she didn't lean into his touch either. We'll see, John. Actions speak louder than words. John slept on the couch that night, his mind racing with guilt and determination. When he woke up, Sarah was already in the kitchen, sipping her coffee as if nothing had happened. Morning, he said cautiously. Morning, she replied, her tone neutral. As he poured himself a cup, she set a list on the counter. These are the things we need to work on. Counseling, honesty, transparency. If you're serious about fixing this, then you'll start here. John picked up the list, his heart sinking as he read it. But he nodded. I'll do it. Whatever it takes. Sarah's expression softened, but only slightly. Good, because this is your last chance, John. Don't waste it. As he left for work, John felt a strange mixture of relief and fear. Sarah was giving him a chance to make things right, but he knew it wouldn't be easy. And deep down, he wasn't sure if he deserved her forgiveness. The days following John's confession were heavy with uncertainty. Sarah wasn't sure if she had done the right thing by giving him a chance, and John was haunted by the weight of his betrayal. Their house, once filled with the comfortable rhythms of routine, was now a quiet battlefield where every word and action carried unspoken questions. A new start. John arrived home earlier than usual one evening, carrying a bouquet of white lilies, Sarah's favorite. He found her in the living room, curled up with a book. The sight of her, so composed and quietly strong, filled him with a mixture of love and regret. For you, he said, holding out the flowers. Sarah glanced at them, her expression unreadable. She set her book down and took the bouquet. Thank you, she said softly, though her tone lacked the warmth he remembered. I thought we could have dinner together tonight. John ventured. Maybe talk? Sarah nodded, but her silence lingered as she placed the flowers in a vase. Let's eat first, she said, then we'll see. Dinner and truths. At the table, John had cooked for the first time in years, pan-seared salmon, asparagus, and mashed potatoes. Sarah took a bite, raising her eyebrows in mild surprise. This is good, she admitted. I wanted to do something for you, John said. It's a start. Cooking one meal doesn't erase everything, Sarah replied, her tone measured. But it's appreciated. They ate mostly in silence until John set down his fork and took a deep breath. Sarah, I know I've hurt you, and I know words aren't enough, but I need to tell you something. She looked up, her gaze steady. Go on. I ended things with Michelle. Completely. She's out of my life, John said. I deleted her number, blocked her on everything. There's no going back. Sarah's eyes searched his face for any sign of hesitation. Why now? What changed? You did, he admitted. You've been so strong, Sarah, stronger than I deserve. Watching you, seeing the way you've handled all this, it made me realize how much I've taken you for granted, how much I still love you. She studied him, her expression softening slightly. Love isn't just words, John. It's actions, consistency, trust. And right now, trust is the hardest thing for me. I know, he said, his voice breaking, but I'll do whatever it takes to earn it back. Counseling and clarity. Sarah had insisted on counseling as part of their rebuilding process. Their first session was awkward, both of them hesitant to speak freely in front of the therapist, a kind but firm woman named Dr. Monroe. So, John, Dr. Monroe began, what do you think led you to seek something outside your marriage? John hesitated, glancing at Sarah before answering. I felt lost, unimportant, like I wasn't the man I used to be. And Michelle made me feel alive. Sarah flinched at his words, but kept her composure. Dr. Monroe turned to her. And how did that make you feel, Sarah? Like I wasn't enough, she said, her voice steady but pained. Like everything I've done for him, for our family, didn't matter. That's not true, John said quickly, turning to her. You are enough, Sarah. More than enough. This was never about you. It was about me and my insecurities. And yet, I'm the one who's left picking up the pieces, Sarah replied, her voice sharper now. Dr. Monroe intervened. This is good. Honest communication is the first step. John, if you want to rebuild trust, you'll need to take responsibility for your actions and give Sarah the time and space she needs. I will, John said, his voice firm. I'll do whatever it takes. Temptations and tests. Though John had ended things with Michelle, she wasn't ready to disappear quietly. One afternoon, as he left the office, he found her waiting by his car. We need to talk, she said, her tone urgent. There's nothing to talk about, John replied, keeping his voice low. It's over, Michelle. Is it? She challenged. Because you seemed pretty torn last time we talked. John sighed, his frustration mounting. It's over. I'm choosing my wife. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. Michelle stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Do you think she'll ever trust you again? Do you think she'll ever look at you the same way? You're fooling yourself, John. John clenched his fists, fighting the urge to respond. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving Michelle standing in the parking lot. Small steps forward. At home, Sarah was beginning to see changes in John. He was more present, more attentive. He no longer guarded his phone like a lifeline. He volunteered to help around the house, asked about her day, and even suggested they start a new hobby together. One evening, he surprised her with tickets to a jazz concert, something they used to enjoy in their early years of marriage. I thought it might be nice, he said, handing her the tickets. Just the two of us. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. Okay, let's try. At the concert, the music seemed to bridge the distance between them. For the first time in months, Sarah found herself smiling genuinely as John reached for her hand. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental, an unexpected encounter. Just as things seemed to be improving, an encounter threatened to undo their progress. At the grocery store, Sarah ran into Michelle. She recognized her immediately from photos on John's phone, a woman she had never met but had come to loathe. Sarah, right? Michelle said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. Sarah stiffened. And you are? Michelle, she said, her smile tight. I work with John, or well, I used to. Sarah's blood ran cold, but she refused to let Michelle see her shaken. Is there something you need? Michelle tilted her head, her expression feigning innocence. Just wanted to say how impressed I am. Not every woman would have the strength to forgive what you've forgiven. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she forced a smile. And not every woman would settle for being second choice. Have a nice day, Michelle. She walked away without another word, her heart pounding as adrenaline coursed through her veins. A turning point. That evening, Sarah told John about the encounter. He was visibly shaken, his guilt resurfacing. She's trying to cause trouble, he said, his voice firm. But I won't let her. I'm done with her, Sarah. I swear. Sarah nodded, though the pain lingered. I handled it. But John, I need you to understand, this can't happen again. I won't go through this twice. It won't, he said, his voice resolute. You have my word. A fragile peace. As the weeks passed, their relationship began to stabilize. They attended counseling regularly, shared more open conversations, and slowly started rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. But the wounds were still fresh, and both knew it would take time to fully heal. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, John turned to Sarah and said, "Thank you." "For what?" she asked, surprised. "For giving me a chance," he said. "For being stronger than I deserve. I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to you." Sarah smiled faintly, her hand resting on his. "Just don't waste this chance, John, because it's the last one." He nodded, his resolve firm. Their marriage was far from perfect, but for the first time in years, they both felt like they were fighting for the same future. And that, they realized, was a start. The morning was crisp, the autumn leaves painting the neighborhood in shades of gold and crimson. Sarah stood by the kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. She watched as John raked the yard, his movements deliberate, almost meditative. He had taken to doing small chores around the house, things he used to leave to her. It was his way of showing her that he was committed to their rebuilding process. But commitment wasn't enough. Trust was a fragile thing, and though it had been months since his confession, Sarah still felt its absence like a phantom limb. She wasn't sure if she would ever fully trust him again. "Hey," John said as he came inside, his cheeks flushed from the chilly air. "I finished the front yard. I'll do the back after breakfast." Sarah nodded, setting her cup down. "You didn't have to do all that this morning." "I wanted to," he said simply, his eyes searching hers. A new opportunity. Later that day, John approached Sarah with an envelope in his hand. He seemed nervous, shifting his weight from one foot to the other as he handed it to her. "What's this?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Open it," he said, his voice tinged with both excitement and apprehension. Sarah unfolded the paper inside and scanned the contents. It was a booking confirmation for a weekend getaway at a secluded cabin in the mountains. You booked a trip? She asked, surprised. I thought we could use some time away, John said. No distractions, no work, no complications. Just us. Sarah hesitated. The gesture was thoughtful, but the idea of being alone with him, with nothing but time to reflect, made her uneasy. Still, she saw the hope in his eyes and decided to give it a chance. When do we leave? She asked, a small smile tugging at her lips. Next weekend, he said, relief washing over his face. The drive to the cabin was quiet but not uncomfortable. They listened to soft music, occasionally making small talk about the changing scenery. When they arrived, Sarah was struck by the beauty of the place. The cabin was nestled among towering pine trees, with a clear view of a sparkling lake. It's beautiful, she said as they stepped out of the car. I thought you'd like it, John replied, grabbing their bags. Inside, the cabin was cozy and rustic, like with a stone fireplace and large windows that let in the natural light. John set about lighting the fire while Sarah explored the space. This is nice, she said, her voice carrying a note of approval. John smiled, feeling a glimmer of hope. Confronting the past, that evening, as they sat by the fire, Sarah broke the silence. Do you think we can ever go back to how we were? She asked, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames. John set down his glass of wine and leaned forward. I don't want to go back, Sarah. I want to move forward, to build something better than what we had. She turned to him, her eyes filled with doubt. But how? Every time I look at you, I remember her. I remember what you did. John reached for her hand, but she pulled away. I know I can't erase the past, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But I can promise you that I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I'm the man you deserve. Sarah sighed, running a hand through her hair. You say that now, but what happens when life gets hard again? When the excitement wears off? I'll fight, John said, his tone resolute. I'll fight for you, for us, every single day. I'm not going to take you for granted again, Sarah. I can't lose you. An unexpected call. The next morning, as they were having breakfast, John's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. Who is it? Sarah asked, her voice cautious. It's Michelle, he admitted, his jaw tightening. Sarah's stomach twisted. Why is she still calling you? I don't know, John said, silencing the phone. I told her it's over. I haven't spoken to her in months. Then why hasn't she gotten the message? Sarah asked, her tone sharper now. I'll handle it, John said, standing up. No, Sarah said firmly. You'll handle it now. I need to see you end this. John hesitated, but then nodded. He stepped outside to return the call, and Sarah followed, staying close enough to hear. Michelle, what do you want? He said, his voice cold. John, I need closure, Michelle said on the other end. I need to know why you chose her over me. Because she's my wife, John said, his voice unwavering. Because I love her, and because what we had was a mistake. Don't call me again. He ended the call and turned to Sarah, his expression earnest. It's done. Sarah searched his face for any sign of doubt or lingering feelings, but found none. For the first time in months, she believed him. Rekindling the flame. That evening, they sat by the lake, the stars reflecting on the water's surface. Sarah leaned against John, her head resting on his shoulder. Do you remember the first time we went camping? She asked, her voice soft. John chuckled. How could I forget? You complained the whole time about the bugs. I still hate bugs, she said, smiling. But you loved the stars, he said, pointing to the sky. You said you'd never seen anything so beautiful. Sarah looked up, her smile fading. I used to think we were like those stars, constant, unchanging. We still can be, John said, turning to her. We've just got to find our way back. She looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I want to believe that, John. I really do. A new vow. On their last night at the cabin, John surprised Sarah with a small ceremony. He had set up candles and flowers on the deck overlooking the lake. What is this? Sarah asked, her heart pounding. It's a vow renewal, John said, taking her hands in his. I know I don't deserve it, but I want to make new promises to you, Sarah. Promises I intend to keep. She stared at him, her emotions a whirlwind. John, please, he said, just hear me out. He took a deep breath and began. Sarah, I've made mistakes. I've hurt you in ways I can never fully make up for. But I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that to you. I promise to be honest, to cherish you, and to never take you for granted again. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she listened. When he finished, she took a deep breath and spoke. I don't know if I can forget, John, but I'm willing to try because I still love you too. They kissed under the stars, the promise of a new beginning lingering in the air. Moving forward. When they returned home, things weren't perfect, but they were better. Continued counseling, worked on rebuilding their connection, and slowly found their way back to each other. For Sarah, forgiveness wasn't about forgetting, it was about choosing to move forward despite the pain. And for John, redemption wasn't about erasing his mistakes, it was about proving every day that he was worthy of her love. Their journey was far from over, but they were finally walking the same path. And for the first time in a long time, they both felt hope.